Hello, my name is Maggie Althaus, and I am a senior at Carroll College. I am pursuing a biology degree and a certificate in geographic information systems. Today, I would like to share with you a project that I've been working on since last fall to examine potential locations for additional chronic wasting disease hunter check stations in the state of Montana. This project developed for me because I have an interest in the disease and because I grew up in an area with a significant chronic wasting disease history. Before I begin, I would like to say that all of this data is publicly available and any analysis is not meant as a criticism nor as a sponsorship from any organization or agency. Chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a deadly degenerative disease affecting the nervous system of cervids. CWD is a prion disease, and prions are abnormally folded proteins that cause the production of more misfolded proteins. CWD prions can be found throughout the body and can cause neuronal cell death, resulting in lethal holes in the brain. And the cervid populations that we see most affected by this in Montana are the deer, but also elk and moose. CWD is commonly spread by direct contact between animals, but infected animals can also shed these prions into the environment through urine, feces, and as a decomposing carcass. Some evidence has also indicated that these prions can survive in the environment for at least up to 2 years and can continue to infect otherwise healthy animals. An animal that does have chronic wasting disease would likely present with excessive salivation, a dramatic weight loss, and their head lowered with ears drooping. There have been no documented cases of humans contracting CWD, and some tests done in labs with mice and cell cultures indicate there may be a species barrier. However, there are prion diseases that do affect people, and the CWD mutation in the prion could be a risk to human health as well as agriculture and the ecology. CWD was first noted in captive deer herds in Colorado and Wyoming in the 1970s. Since then, it has been confirmed in multiple regions of North America, as well as Norway, Finland, and North Korea. In 1999, a captive game farm outside of Phillipsburg, Montana, where I grew up, was determined to have the state's first chronic wasting disease case. The game farm was depopulated, and CWD wasn't seen again in the state until 2017, when it was found in free-ranging deer. Chronic wasting disease is also considered an emerging disease in Montana, and from April 2019 to the end of January 2020, 142 animals had tested positive, with most of those cases being deer, but 2 moose and 1 elk also tested positive. Management for chronic wasting disease falls largely on the shoulders of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, who work in conjunction with other organizations and agencies throughout the state. It is incredibly difficult to manage in wild populations of cervids and presents an additional challenge is that there is no cure or vaccine for it. The current method is controlling the population and monitoring and utilizing hotspot culling to remove any infected populations. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is also able to utilize hunters to help control the cervid population. They've implemented special CWD hunter check stations across the state that are able to take tissue samples and test to see if there are chronic wasting disease prions in the animals harvested. Any of these animals who do test positive need to be disposed of properly to avoid the carcass continuing to spread the prions. In Montana, several regions have been designated as management or surveillance zones in the management against chronic wasting disease. The management zones are denoted in orange on this map, and that they are areas where chronic wasting disease is known to exist. And the surveillance zones are gray on this map, and they are areas that are either at elevated risk or, like the one around Phillipsburg, are because of the history with chronic wasting disease. There are also currently 20 CWD check stations implemented across the state for hunters to have their animals tested at. A majority of these stations are around major highways and near towns to provide ample convenient opportunities for hunters as well as staff. Because of the way that chronic wasting disease is transmitted more likely animal to animal, cervids are at an increased risk from being in close proximity to infected animals. Herds also move depending on the season and food availability and other external factors, and this makes it very probable that we will start to see positive cases popping out in other places across the state. and that it makes that the areas adjacent to chronic wasting disease may be at a higher risk because of these herds moving. The scope of this project was to use GIS tools and publicly available information from Montana FWP, Montana Department of Transportation, and the Montana State Library to create an analysis to look if there could be any additional check stations added in Montana near chronic wasting disease areas of concern that would hopefully increase sampling. Potential locations for new chronic wasting disease check stations were determined by the creation of 2 models and then comparing the common locations between the 2. The first model I created is analyzing the population of Montana towns using the 2010 Montana Census data and comparing that to the distance from the nearest chronic wasting disease check station. So to begin with this model, I used the NEAR tool to calculate the distance between towns to the nearest chronic wasting disease check station. Then from all the Montana towns, I selected out the top 20 towns by the largest population because I was hoping to create a model that could best serve the most amount of people. Then I wanted to look at whether those towns were within a reasonable risk area from current chronic wasting disease zones, and I determined that to be about a reasonable distance of 50 miles. That left me with a list of large towns that were within 50 miles of a chronic wasting disease zone. Then I used the NEAR values that I had calculated earlier to find the average distance from a town to a chronic wasting disease check station was 20.92 miles, and the standard deviation was 27.98. Then using the buffer tools, I was able to exclude data that was a large town within 50 miles of a chronic wasting disease zone, but was also within the average distance to a chronic wasting disease check station. So this left me with 2 results. The first was Helena, Montana, and the second was Sidney, Montana. Now, Helena is within 50 miles of the surveillance zone around Phillipsburg, Montana. However, it does also happen to be where the regional FWP office is, and those offices would be better equipped to handle any sort of CWD testing than the average town would, and so I therefore excluded them from further analysis. And the next result was Sidney, Montana, that I was interested to see if it would show up again on the second model. The second model I made was the Montana travel data in high-risk areas, and this model addresses any traffic data on major Montana highways going through high-risk areas in the proximity to the current CWD check stations. So to begin with this model, I merged the surveillance and management zones together to have one layer to work with. And then with this model, I decided that I would use a high-risk area around the CWD zones as the adjacent hunting districts because most of these districts already follow major roads in Montana. The next thing I did was separate any major roads from all roads in Montana. This left me with the National Highway System Interstate and other National Highway System highways. And then the primary and secondary Montana highways is effectively excluded any more rural or back roads in Montana. So after that, I just used the NEAR tool again to calculate the distance between chronic wasting disease check stations, and that is the buffer that you see around each check station in this map. The next thing I wanted to look at was the average annual daily travel on these major roads going through high-risk areas. And as you can see in this map, the blue circles represent areas of high average annual daily travel on these roads. So with that, I wanted to select any that were above the average of 3,016. So then using the buffers from earlier, I was able to exclude any data that was either below average travel or was outside of the high-risk areas. So this left me with a criteria of major roads that had above average traffic that were in a CWD high-risk area, but were outside the average check station to check station distance. This also was narrowed down by using the standard deviation of the mean of the NEAR tool as well. This left me with one result, Sidney, Montana. So knowing that, I wanted to take an additional consideration and look at hunter harvest to see if it would really be truly useful to have a new check station in that area. The Hunter Harvest Survey is an annual survey conducted by Montana FWP to gather data about how many animals were harvested and where they were harvested from in the previous hunting season. This data is self-reported by hunters but allows FWP to see trends in hunter success. This map on the right here is from the 2018 Hunter Harvest Survey for deer across the state of Montana. The 2019 has yet to be released. And the areas that are darker green are areas that have had higher deer harvest for that season. So because the results were Sidney, Montana both times, I wanted to take a look at Sidney and see if there was a potential area where we could put a check station. So Sidney, Montana has in the 2010 Montana census had 5,191 residents. It's also located 10 miles west of the North Dakota border, which could create more significance for trying to set up a check station for non-Montana resident hunters. It's right at the junction of Montana Highway 200 and Montana Highway 16, which was where the average annual daily traffic was most significant, was on this stretch of highway going on Highway 16 going into Sidney. Sidney, Montana is also in the top 20 most populated towns and is in a higher risk area for CWD. But however, it is outside the normal distances from the nearest check station, but also has a higher level of traffic from major highways. So within Sidney, I wanted to see if there was any places that would have the potential to be a good location for a check station. And what popped out was the Richland County Fairgrounds. And Sidney, Montana is the county seat for Richland County and is host to the fairgrounds that are located just off of Montana Highway 16 in the west part of town. And this was nearly adjacent perfectly to where the highest average annual daily traffic was, and would provide easy access for hunters traveling through Sidney. Both models of this analysis have found that there is a potential to add a useful new location for chronic wasting disease hunter check stations in Sidney, Montana. This area could be considered because it is maybe in a higher risk category due to the proximity to chronic wasting disease management areas, and that it may be more accessible to more hunters that are residents and those that are passing through. Upon further research, I did learn that Montana FWP has implemented a temporary chronic wasting disease check station that started in November of 2019 that was open Sundays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We do not know if that will continue into the hunting season of 2020 as of yet. But I argue that this could be a good location for a permanent check station because permanent check stations are often well known to the hunting public, and because of that knowledge, in the face of a rapidly developing outbreak, I think that Sidney, Montana could be a good location for this check station because it does have a higher human population and is in a transportation corridor. So some of the issues addressed with this project was that cervid populations can fluctuate dramatically season to season and move around with little regard to human boundaries, and it makes it very difficult to predict what areas may be at higher risk than others. This project also doesn't analyze any social dynamics where hunting may play a larger role in the local cultures than in other areas. And it also does not argue that all traffic can be attributed to just hunters who are passing through, or even those that may use more rural roads more regularly. Montana is also home to 7 Native American reservations and the state-recognized Little Shell Tribe of the Chippewa Indians. And each reservation has their own tribal fish and game and management plan that may work in conjunction with the state of Montana and Montana FWP for chronic wasting disease management, but it does create some difficulties trying to gather comprehensive data for the state, and on some maps, as you noticed earlier, it may just be excluded from analysis altogether. Lastly, this project could have been enhanced by having much more current data. A majority of this data is from 2018 and 2019, and the United States Census for 2020 has not been done yet, and will be interesting to see what, if any, changes are made by having more current 2020 data. For this project, I would like to thank my professor Eric Spangenberg for his advice during this project. And if any of you have any questions, my contact information is right here, and I would love to look forward to hearing any questions you may have for me. Thank you for listening.